Good afternoon. Welcome to All Saints. It's wonderful to see all of you here. A little housekeeping thing. If you need a washroom, we have one right outside the church and one down the hallway, but there are also washrooms downstairs, so you can come in, you can go down the stairs. There's some there as well. And please stay afterwards. We have some coffee and goodies so that we can visit a bit, and maybe you'll have a chance to speak to Floyd or to Lois, who I'm going to introduce now. So we were really hoping that after Floyd got back from his walk, he would give a presentation, and so we're delighted that he has done so. And the idea came forward that let's use this to the good that goes beyond. And we've got someone here from the Diocese of Calgary who's the representative of something called Alongside Hope, which is our Anglican Partners in Mission program. Lois will tell you a bit about it, but we thought their name being Alongside Hope, and so the idea of pilgrimage and walking and coming alongside were two themes that went well together. So I would like to introduce to you Lois Reed, and she'll tell you a little bit about Alongside Hope, and then we will turn things over to Floyd.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Lois Reed, and I am going to refer to my notes because I was told I have 20 minutes. It'll probably be 2.5 hours, so just put your feet up. And I worship at Christ Church, Millerville, the little church above the Millerville racetrack. It's a log cabin church, and we're celebrating our 130th anniversary in May. Next slide, please. I want to tell you everything about Alongside Hope. It used to be called the Primates World Relief Development Fund, PWRDF. So us longtime Anglicans know about that, but everybody thought we were supporting orangutans. Instead of the primate being like the prime minister of the church, the primate. So they changed it to Alongside Hope because we are walking alongside developing nations. There's three things I want you to know. The first thing is, this is an Anglican charity supported by Anglicans, representing Anglicans throughout the world. Hooray us. I usually end the presentation with this, but I'd like to start with this. I've always been proud to be a Canadian, but after working with Alongside Hope, I have to tell you, I'm so proud to be an Anglican. Your parish rep is new. It's Teresa Jones. She couldn't be here today, but we'll be working together with your minister as to how we best proceed in, giving you more information and opportunities about Alongside Hope. Next slide, please. It all started in 1961 with the Spring Hill mining disaster. Some people might remember that or know their Canadian history. And the Anglican Church rallied, but not just the Anglican Church of Nova Scotia or the Maritimes, it was across Canada that they rallied to fundraise and support the families of the victims of the Spring Hill mining disaster. And Anglicans realized, hey, we're onto something. We can rally together. We can make a difference. Now, in 2026, our initiatives include humanitarian relief, food security and climate change, refugee assistance, Indigenous programs, female empowerment, and disaster assistance. From one little event to all this. Next slide, please. In May of 2024, there was a little note in our diocesan newsletter saying we need a rep for Alongside Hope. So I phoned up Carol Tubman, our diocesan secretary, and said, so what does this entail? And she said, oh, Lois, it's easy. Just a couple of emails a year. Right, exactly. So here I am today. Then in February 2025, I was invited on a trip to Kenya to see what Alongside Hope is doing and to visit the projects. We started in Nairobi. We went to Isolos, which is north, Marsabit, which is north, back to Nairobi, south to Machakos. Why? Why did we go? To see firsthand the difference that Alongside Hope is doing, to see the direct connection between Alongside Hope and on-the-ground agencies. So the first thing I want you to remember is that it is a uniquely Anglican charity working throughout the world. The second thing I want you to know is partnerships, and I'll get into that in a minute. And then I've been asked to report back, to say to you, I was there. It is working, the money is getting there, and it is making a difference. Next slide, please. So this is us in the Kenyan heat with a bishop, an archbishop's wife, an archdeacon, a deacon, two youth representatives from the National Council, and then little old me. And I got to go. Next slide, please. So the partners that we visited was Utuni Development Organization, Anglican Sustainable Development Agency, ECLOF, which is Village Banking Systems, and Church World Service. Canada is a big country, but we've got a small population. Anglicans within that small population is an even smaller population. So how is it that Alongside Hope can do so much? Partnerships. Partnerships. We work with on-the-ground, local, vetted, reliable, accredited, reputable agencies on the ground. We are using local technology, local expertise, and supporting the local economy. That is key to our efficacy. Next slide, please. Well, it was really fun worshiping at an Anglican church in Kenya. Boy, oh boy, they do not wear sweatshirts to church in Kenya. They're all dressed up, whoa. And they sing, "Crown him with many crowns." All the Anglican hymns that you and I know so well, they sing with gusto. Well, Anglicans have been linking up with Anglicans, so we linked up with the Anglican Development Services East. Again, local agencies that have trust in the local system. Next slide, please. The Anglican Development Services really focuses on youth initiatives. Now, you know, in southern Alberta, small rural towns, the kids grow up, move away, and never go home. Well, that's happening in Africa. They're lured away by the promises of big money in the city. And so these young people, vulnerable teenagers, leave to find that they have no skills for big city jobs, end up in gangs, poverty, violence, and the young women end up in a very unseemly profession. It ruins those young people's lives, and it decimates their villages. So Anglican Development Services has partnered with Alongside Hope to develop industries in the local villages. And you're going to see chickens. So instead of the chickens just randomly running around, they have offered training so that these young people have a poultry industry. So they now have meat, eggs, and money. Money for education for their kids and health care for the families. They're thriving. There's absolutely no reason to leave the village because they're thriving where they are. In the corner, you're going to see the rocket stove. That lady is leaning over a concrete block with a hole at the bottom and a hole at the top. And this is really changing the health of the population. No longer do they have a fire in the middle of their home, which just fills the place with smoke. The rocket stove is fuel efficient, so they're not decimating the forest, and high heat, so quick cooking, and low smoke. So we have introduced rocket stoves. Next slide, please. So I talked about the village bank. They can't go to a big city and get money from the bank. They have no collateral. And so with the little seed money, they have a local banking system that belongs to the community. It doesn't belong to an individual, it belongs to the community. And so with the money that they make from their chickens, they put into the local bank. It's really just a steel box, actually, so that people can borrow, develop their industry, and pay back. And so what you see in the middle there is their prized possession. It cost them $800 to buy an incubator. And the incubator, of course, has just really expanded their poultry operation. What you see on the left is the goat. So if you saw the Christmas flyer about buying a goat, I met the goat. This is the goat. Now, when you're driving through the small towns of Africa, the goats are really small, like a Highland Scottish Terrier, a little more nimble, but they're small. This goat is the size of a sheepdog, drought resistant, and more meat, more milk, and income. The cathedral fundraised a couple of years ago, and they were going to fundraise, and their goal was 20 goats. They fundraised and they purchased 37 goats. I'm dying to go to the cathedral and say, I met your goat. Next slide, please. We don't just parachute into a community. We meet with the leadership, find out what the need is, tell them what we can offer, and come to an agreement. What we offer is emergency relief, if needed, skill training in goat herds and chicken industries, and gender sensitivity. Now, that has a very different meaning for us here in North America. There, it really means that women can be valued members of the family and of the community. And it was interesting, we asked the women, how do your husbands treat you now that you're bringing income into the family? And the answer was, they love us better. So the community has to agree to relief training, gender sensitivity, leadership training, all towards the goal of sustainability. So the first thing I wanted you to remember is this is uniquely Anglican. The second thing I wanted you to remember is the value of partnerships. And the third thing I want you to remember is our goal is sustainability. You know the old saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach him to fish and he can feed himself for a lifetime. Sustainability. Our goal is that they are no longer dependent upon foreign relief, but rather giving them the skill and the agency to be self-sustaining. When you empower women, the first thing that they do is they feed their family. The second thing they do is they share with the community. So you empower women, and you are saving the whole community. Next slide, please. Well, climate change is a real thing. The farmers will tell you we had a rainy season and a dry season. We knew when to plant, we knew when to harvest. But the problem now is the rain is coming at the wrong time. And when it does come, it's not enough. Aha. What do we know in dry southern Alberta? We know all about water capture. We know about reservoirs. We know about dams. For goodness sake, we've got the St. Mary's irrigation system. We know water capture. And so the Utuni Development Organization addresses water scarcity, soil erosion, land degradation, and hunger. And this is a solar well. You can see the solar panel. I wish you could see the smiles on their faces. Everywhere we went, they were so proud to show us the rocket stove, the goat, the chickens, the incubator, the well. Well, next slide, please. And now you can see the sand dam. Sand dams, shallow wells, is all about water capture for sustainable agriculture. The pride and the gratitude of the people was palpable. Next slide, please. Church World Service is an American organization. It's been in existence for over 30 years, and they're kind of the umbrella organization in Kenya. And they climate resilience, adaptation, food security, nutrition, migration, dignity, resettlement. But they found a remote tribe in eastern Kenya. We drove from Nairobi to Asolos for one day, Asolos to Marsabit for another day. Then next morning, 2 hours on pavement, and then 2 hours east on a dirt road. We were truly in the middle of nowhere. When Church World Service found them, the men had left with the herds of goats, literally to go to greener pastures. The women were left to scramble and survive somehow. We were told, Church World Service, their resources had all been allocated. So they approached their partner, us, alongside Hope, to single-handedly support the intervention of the Samburu tribe. When we got there, we heard all the stories, and they were 1 month away from their children starving to death. Church, alongside Hope, offered immediate food and water relief. Then we entered into an agreement for gender sensitivity. We taught them with water, that we provided water, so they were able to grow kitchen gardens. The grain that we bring in is local grain because their tummies can't accept Canadian grain. It's local grain that matches their own digestive system. And the leafy greens aren't the leafy greens that you and I would try and grow. Again, it's local, so it's sustainable for the climate. And empowering women, they sell their beadwork. Next slide, please. So there's the grain. Can you go back to the next slide, please? The grain, the huts, you can see the hut, there we go. The water in a bucket that they're watering their garden, and the beadwork. Next slide, please. We are grateful to Church World Service and Alongside Hope. It was when they came, we knew the world had not forgotten us. I was there when they told us the stories. But it was kind of surreal. They were sitting under a tree. They had lawn chairs for us. And we're all old enough to remember a National Geographic special, right? So there'd be a special on gibbon monkeys, and there'd be a special on the birds of Papua New Guinea, and there'd be a special on the remote tribes of Africa. And so it was like sitting under that tree watching a National Geographic special, because they were wearing their traditional clothes that they'd always worn for hundreds of years. They were living in huts that they'd always lived in for hundreds of years. So it was a little surreal until one woman looked up, caught my eye, and smiled, and poof. All of a sudden, it was real. She was real. The women under the tree were real. Well, then the drought is real. Then their suffering is real. Somebody's got to help them. What are they saying? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Every woman that spoke told their story, but they always started with thank you. Without you, without Alongside Hope, we wouldn't still be here. And I'm thinking, don't thank me. I didn't do anything. And then I realized they're thanking Alongside Hope. They're thanking Anglicans. They're thanking you. They're thanking you. They're thanking you. Your support of Alongside Hope made it possible for Alongside Hope to go in and offer grain, water, goats, training, sustainability, and hope. Actually, the name Alongside Hope came from this Samburu tribe. Before Alongside Hope, they didn't have any hope. After we showed up, their kids are fed, their goats are running around, the women are happy, and their men are loving them better. Next slide, please. This trip was transformative. I thought Alongside Hope was just another nice charity, but I was there to see whether or not it was making a difference. I have to tell you about the sign in the parking lot of the Nairobi airport. It's a great big sign that says, "This airport is a corruption-free zone." Well, does that mean everywhere else isn't corruption-free? So your dollar does not go through a government agency and get skimmed off. Your dollar doesn't go through a third party that's paying administrators. The Anglican Church of Canada office is supporting the overhead of Alongside Hope, so that your dollar goes directly from Alongside Hope to Atuni Development or Anglican Development Services or Church World Service. It's a very unique charity. But more than that, at the end of our trip, we held a conference. And we are international leaders. Little old Alongside Hope is an international leader amongst all these development organizations. We had all these partners in Kenya that didn't know about each other, that had never spoken to each other. So before we left, we had a full day where they got to talk to each other to find out what each other is doing, to avoid duplication of service, to maximize financial efficiency. And who put that all together? Alongside Hope. Next slide, please. When we arrived in Kenya, it was 5 years after the United States president had ended U.S. humanitarian aid across the world. The United States donates something like $30 billion in humanitarian aid. Monday morning, Church World Service sent out 800 workers throughout Kenya to support vulnerable populations. At noon, they got the email saying that funding had ended immediately. By the end of the day, they had to lay off 500 workers. I phoned, I used WhatsApp. Aren't you proud of me? I used WhatsApp. I used WhatsApp to get a hold of somebody at Church World Service. Out of 800 workers, they only have 50 left. So, what did Alongside Hope do? They ran the Resilience Fund last June. And we had an anonymous donor say, if you can raise $250,000 in 6 weeks, I'll match it. Canadians, Anglicans stepped up to the plate. In 6 weeks, Canadian Anglicans across the country came up with $250,000, so $500,000 has gone to support those agencies that lost their USAID funding. Did I say I was proud to be an Anglican? Canadian Anglicans are making a difference across the world. Since then, what have we done since then? Solar suitcases so that hospitals could have light after 5:30, because at 6 o'clock, it's jet black. And so lots of health conditions happen after 6 o'clock. Lots of babies are born in the middle of the night. Can you imagine with no light? So the size of a suitcase is a battery that provides light for hospitals. I am presenting at another church that wants to know about whether or not Alongside Hope is credible. Next slide, please. This is a lot of writing. There is a fifth no, what do you call it, a third person party that's kind of removed, that evaluates all the nonprofit organizations and charities in Canada. Alongside Hope has a 5-star rating. It's in the top 108 charities in Canada. That's the credibility of Alongside Hope. There are charities out there where 30, 35, 40% goes to administration, and I get it. They've got to pay their staff, they've got to pay for their offices, etc., etc. Alongside Hope is 18%. That is the credibility of Alongside Hope. Next slide. Every year, Alongside Hope responds to emergencies in Canada, the Fort McMurray fire, the Jasper fire, and around the world. We allocate grants to appeals and issued by ACT Alliance, which is an organization of 140 international Christian organizations working in areas of high need. So ACT Alliance is a collection of Christian organizations, of which we are one, and we access their network. We network with them. We can only put in 100,000 for this. Can you put in 100,000 for that? So 200,000 goes to a project. Alongside Hope works with the Canadian Food Grains Bank, another Canadian innovation. Way back when, you might have remembered the Ethiopian famine, and that's when Canadian grain farmers sent grain to Ethiopia, and thus began the Canadian Food Grains Bank. They don't send actual grain anymore, again, for the reasons that I told you. It needs to be match their digestive needs differently. Also, transportation was hard, mold was hard. So we partner with Canadian Food Grains Bank for those emergency relief interventions. Next slide. In partnership with Canadian Food Grains Bank, 250 metric tons of corn, 390 metric tons of beans, 133,000 liters of cooking oil, etc., were provided to 13,000 households experiencing the worst drought in 40 years. That's what Alongside Hope is doing. Next slide, please. Oh, your support goes to 30 countries, 288,292 participants, and in support of refugees, 4.78 million. And how can you help? Well, thank you. You've already put money in the basket at the back. Thank you. Please know that your dollar is making a difference. Please be assured that the money is actually getting there. Please know that it is making a difference. When we showed up, we knew that the world had not forgotten us. There are donation envelopes at the back. For any donation over $20, of course, leave your contact information and you'll be mailed a receipt. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. But now you can tell people what a difference Alongside Hope is making, how it maximizes partnerships, how it maximizes donations, fully supported by Anglicans and making a difference in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois, very much. It was really informative and, as you can see, a very good organization. It must have been quite a trip. So now you might want to stand and stretch for a sec as we invite Floyd to come up to talk about a different kind of journey.
And if any of you have ever fought with a computer and lost, I have to tell you, Floyd and Gary fought with the computer and won. It's because of them my slideshow worked. Thank you, Floyd. Thank you, Gary.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to hear my Camino story. I'm a little bit overwhelmed to see so many people. I will begin by telling you why I chose to do the Camino. Okay. Sorry. I'll tell about my research, planning, and preparation for the pilgrimage. And then I will spend most of the time talking about the journey, both the external and the internal journey. And I'll talk briefly about my post-Camino and the conclusions that I reach. It is a story with many coincidences that started in July of 2024. So why would anyone choose to walk the Camino, or El Camino, as it is commonly known? Well, actually, El Camino, El in Spanish is the, so the Camino. So in particular, why did I choose to walk it? It was not on my bucket list because I don't even have a bucket list. I knew very little about the Camino other than it is a pilgrimage trail with spiritual significance. I first heard about it when my sister walked the Camino many years ago when she was doing walks for the cure for the arthritis. So I was surprised in July 2024 when the idea popped into my mind that I should walk the Camino. The thought created a bit of a desire, but I had many concerns and dismissed the idea right away. It was beyond my comfort zone. But I did pray to God that if it was His will that I do it, that He would help me overcome my concerns and fears. A few weeks later, Deacon Elizabeth talked in her sermon about receiving God's call. And I realized then that I was receiving God's call to walk the Camino. So I started to think about, well, why would I want to walk the Camino? I rationalized that I like to walk. I plan to retire from my warden positions at All Saints in 2025. So it would be like restarting my retirement. It would give me time to slow down, be alone with God, and to think about what I really want in my retirement. So after mulling the idea of Camino over for a couple of weeks, I mentioned it to Norma. She reacted positively, taking it in stride, and started to do her own research to learn about it. So at that point, I decided to take the next step to start doing my own research before making a final decision. I set out to learn as much as I could about the Camino. I read books, researched on the internet, and watched movies. One quote in the book, "The Only Way is West," struck me. Every now and then, you have to frighten yourself to feel alive. Every now and then, you have to frighten yourself to feel alive. There are many trails that lead to Santiago de Compostela, where the remains of St. James lie in Santiago Cathedral. Because historically, people started the pilgrimage from their resident country. And you can see on this map of France, Spain, and Portugal, all the trails that lead to Santiago. What you can't really see, because there are dashed lines on the water, is there are trails coming from the UK as well. Of course, people come by boat. They start in the UK, come by boat, and finish the Camino in Spain. Many bishops came from France, hence the Camino Français was established, and is the oldest and most popular trail. Some people still start the Camino from their home country. One person I met on the Camino started in Germany. When I saw her, she had been on the trail for 100 days. But after researching the various trails, I decided to walk the Camino Français. And it's the trail to the north. It's a little bolder than the rest, and it starts in Saint Jean Pied de Port in France and progresses westward to Santiago de Compostela. Still hadn't decided for sure whether I was going to do it or not, but one Saturday in September I prayed for discernment. The next day, Ruth Ann preached on the Epistle of St. James and mentioned the Camino de Santiago. Well, I took that as an answer to my prayer from the previous day and my confirmation to do it. So I spent the next months doing more research, planning, and preparing for the trip and making travel arrangements. I decided to go in the fall, even though I'd be on the trail on my birthday, our daughter's birthday, and on our anniversary. Norman reassured me that my family would get by just fine without me. Well, that was a bit reassuring, but a little concerning as well. The Pilgrim's Guide to the Camino by John Brealey divides the Camino Français into 33 stages, and it suggests allowing 5 to 6 weeks to complete it. The purpose of a pilgrimage is to let the Spirit guide you, so I did not want to prepare a detailed plan and make reservations for the entire Camino. It's an idea just to be more free-flowing and stop when you feel like stopping. Most people stay in hostels overnight, but I was a little apprehensive about staying in them. But as I learned more about them and read about people who had done the Camino, I did become more comfortable about them. Norma's main concern was my safety. How would she know that I had arrived safely at my destination each day? We agreed that I would use an app on my phone to track my travels. My family would be able to follow me and see where I arrived each day. In addition, we also agreed to communicate using WhatsApp so that I could let them know each day that I had arrived safely. So as I've mentioned, a pilgrimage is an intentional spiritual journey. It is about encounter, not destination. And I had to remind myself about that often on the trail. My spiritual director suggested I determine my intentions for the Camino. And in his guidebook to the Camino, Greeley states that a pilgrim travels on two paths simultaneously and must pay equal attention to both. When we place ourselves on the pilgrim path, we sow the intention to stretch and expand soul consciousness so that we can lift ourselves out of the mundane in order to journey back to God. The guidebook also contains a self-assessment questionnaire to assist with inner preparation. I was continuing to talk to people about the Camino, and last May I went on a 3-day golf trip with my best friend and 2 of his friends. One of the other golfers has walked the Camino 4 times, all on the Camino Francés. So, of course, during the next 3 days, I asked questions and he provided me with advice and recommendations. I also joined the Canadian Company of Pilgrims and attended meetings of the Calgary chapter. These provided the opportunity to listen to speakers and talk to people who have done the Camino, some multiple times and on multiple trails, to learn from their experiences. I started training at the beginning of June to increase my endurance so that I could walk distances of up to 28 kilometers a day, day after day after day. I started acquiring the clothing and the gear that I needed for the trips. In the final weeks before I left, several events were held to send me on my way and to help prepare me spiritually and emotionally. Our family met to celebrate September birthdays. My men's prayer group and our wives met. They prayed for me and for Norma and gave me a blessing for the journey. I was also presented with a pilgrimage liturgy, which I prayed every morning on my pilgrimage before I started the journey for the day. Norma hosted a gathering of family and friends to wish me Buen Camino. Along with the best wishes and gifts that I received were some prayer beads with the prayer Altrea Susea. Altrea Susea is a traditional Latin greeting meaning further and higher. I took the prayer with me and wore the prayer beads on a belt loop so I could say the prayer throughout my journey. Coincidentally, during evening prayer at one of the hostels, or albergues in Spanish, at a convent where I stayed, one of the nuns encouraged us to say Altrea Susea as a greeting instead of Buen Camino when we met other pilgrims on the trail. By the time I left, I did feel physically, emotionally, and spiritually prepared for the journey. I left home on September the 8th and caught a direct flight from Calgary to Paris. From Paris, I flew to Biarritz on the southwestern coast of France, and then caught a shuttle bus to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port at the foot of the Pyrenees. I went to the Pilgrim Welcome Office, where I obtained my pilgrim credential. Well, I registered and they validated my pilgrim credential and The credential is required to stay at the hostels on the Camino. It's also used to collect rubber stamps along the way. 1 stamp per day is required until the last 100 kilometers, when 2 stamps per day are required. This just shows the cover of my pilgrim credential on the right and some of the stamps on the left. The stamps can be obtained at restaurants, bars, hostels, churches, and other places along the way. I had some free time to explore St. John, so I stopped at the cathedral to light a candle and pray for my journey. I truly felt God's presence there and knew He would be with me on my pilgrimage. I checked into my hostel, or guite in French. The host provided a communal supper for the 16 pilgrims, and he strove to unite us as a Camino family. He asked us to introduce ourselves and provided a welcoming and friendly atmosphere with good food and good wine. His efforts were successful. We all enjoyed the fellowship and were excited to be starting our pilgrimage the next day. One of the other pilgrims gave each of us a turtle charm to wear or to put on our backpacks as a reminder to take it slow and steady. It was a good reminder for me to slow down and enjoy the journey. That night was a good introduction to sleeping in a hostel because there were only 3 of us in my room. I did encounter some of the pilgrims whom I met that evening throughout my journey and have been in contact with a couple of them since. I started my pilgrimage the next morning with great anticipation and some trepidation, 8:05 on the morning of September the 11th. There are 2 routes from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Roncesvalles. There's the Napoleon Way over the Pyrenees, or the route via Varcolos, which parallels the highway most of the way. It's used mostly in the winter when the pass is closed. And I chose the Napoleon Way, even though it's one of the most arduous stages of the Camino Francais, with a distance of over 25 kilometers and an elevation gain of 1,400 meters. It was a steady climb uphill all the way to the pass over the Pyrenees, but it provided some spectacular views and beautiful scenery. I'm blocking the scenery. But here's some of the views. There was livestock grazing on the lush grass near the trail, including pigs and sheep. A little further up the trail, the trail changed from walking on grass to walking on rock. At the pass, I crossed from France into the province of Navarre in Spain. After the pass, it was mostly downhill to Roncesvalles, but more spectacular views. I was very tired by the time I arrived in Roncesvalles. My feet and toes were sore, but I had no blisters. I ate supper at the albergue and went to the pilgrim mass. That evening, I started hearing rumors that the albergues in Zubiri, my destination for the next day, were already booked. I tried to contact some of them, but received no response. My trip to the next day to Zubiri was mostly downhill and through trees. There were some long, grueling sections over sharp, exposed rock. The Camino passes through many villages along the trail, and this Berget is just a typical one. On the trail that day, the local gendarmes were parked and were stamping pilgrims' passports. I suspect they were doing this to show their presence so pilgrims would know that they do the patrol of the Camino and that it is safe. By the time I arrived in Zaburi, my toes and feet were hurting, but I had developed blisters on my toes. I walked to several albergues and found that indeed they were all full. Apparently, some people were reserving a head. I arrived at a municipal albergue at the same time as two pilgrims who had stayed at the Bellari the night before. This albergue was full, but the hostess was very helpful. She explained some options to us in Spanish, but one of the other pilgrims did understand Spanish. So we decided the most appealing option was to take a taxi to Zabuldica, about 12 kilometers further along the trail. The hostess phoned the albergue there to confirm that did it have a room for us, and then called a taxi for us. This was my first experience of many throughout the journey of a small act of kindness. Without any reason, she just offered us that kindness. In one of the books that I had read, the author often gave examples of how the Camino provides. This was an example of this, but I prefer to think about it as God's providence. After that, I started booking my accommodation in advance. The albergue at Zabuldica is in a former convent attached to St. Stephen's Church. We enjoyed another communal meal that evening and fellowship that goes along with it. Again, I crossed paths with many of the people that were at that albergue that night for the rest of the Camino. The next day, I resumed my journey from Zabuldica. But for the record, the 12 kilometers from Zaburi is not included in the total distance that I walked. I was traveling to Pamplona that day, and I arrived over this medieval bridge and found my way to the old town center. I stopped to see the cathedral and had walked through the old town. I had intended to, or thought about spending the night in Pamplona, but actually after walking to the cathedral and through the streets, I just felt it was too crowded. I was surprised that after only 3 days on the trail, I felt uncomfortable with crowds. I stopped for lunch at a bar or restaurant where two couples from southern U.S. invited me to join them. After lunch, I continued my journey. On the way out of Pamplona, I missed a turn, but a jogger pointed out that I was going the wrong way and directed me back to the trail. Again, this was another example of God looking out for me. I continued until I found an albergue run by the Order of St. John of Malta in Cizur Manor, a bedroom community 5 kilometers from Pamplona. The albergue is beside the Church of St. Michael Archangel, the turrets at the back. I had a tea and snacked on freshly picked figs, which were a real treat. I'd never had fresh figs before. On the way to the restaurant that night, I met another pilgrim from London, and whom I had met at the pilgrim office in St. John. We found a restaurant and enjoyed a meal together. We've hit it off really well, despite our age difference and having nothing in common, other than we were walking the Camino. We've crossed paths several more times on the Camino, but never had the opportunity to dine together again before he headed north to a different route into Santiago. Now, the Camino is well marked with signs. There's this shell symbol, yellow arrows, signs on posts, and then in the cities, there are also signs, but it's a little hard to see them amongst all the traffic signs. So a little later on the Camino, I was walking through town further and missed another sign. I hadn't walked far when a lady who was working in her garden started yelling at me and motioning to me. So I couldn't understand it because she was speaking in Spanish, but I did get the message that I was off the trail. She motioned back down the street, and I noticed pilgrims crossing the road to the trail. When I got back to the crosswalk, I saw a sign that I had previously missed because it was covered with stickers. And unfortunately, that is a common practice along the Camino. But this was, I think, the only one that I saw that was totally obliterated. The trail on the next day ascended the Alto del Perdón, the Hill of Forgiveness. This is where there are sculptures of pilgrims, and it is a photograph that is often used when showing the Camino. That hill provided spectacular views. One thing that I noticed walking through Spain is there's wind turbines on a lot of the hills, so they must generate a lot of wind power. I was heading to Puente Luena that day and passed through some wooded areas, farmland, and then when I reached Puente Luena, again, there's a Romanesque bridge crossing the river into Puente Luena. That evening, I went into a restaurant for supper, and a couple from near Toronto invited me to join them. Two pilgrims from Netherlands and Estonia sat at a table beside us. We enjoyed our meal together while a pilgrim from the Netherlands, who had quite a sense of humor, kept us entertained. The next day, I set out from Puente Luena, crossed bridges, and through farmland and vineyards. More bridges. A large aqueduct provides water for irrigation. I just got ahead of myself a bit, but here's an olive tree. So they do irrigate their crops, and they have large aqueducts carrying the water. Starting to get into an area, like I said before, of agricultural land. This looks quite familiar, really, of farmland and hay bales, mountains in the distance. The trail passed right through and across farmers' fields. On day 6, the trail from Puente Luena on day 6, the Camino passed a winery that has a wine fountain on the outside wall. And you can just kind of see it there. Traditionally, pilgrims fill their scallop shells to take a sip of wine. And they carry their scallop shells with them. They're given it to them in the pilgrim office in St. John, wherever they start. This is a mural of a pilgrim, and it just, you can see him and his dog and his backpack beside the dog and the shell on the backpack. The scallop shell has become a well-recognized symbol for the Camino, and pilgrims hang the shell on their backpacks. One explanation of this is the scallop shell signifies the arrival of the remains of St. James to Spain from Jerusalem in a stone boat that was covered with scallop shells by the time it landed on Spain's coast. The shell is on many markers throughout the pilgrimage. Sorry, I went ahead too fast. That's the one I was trying to show you. So I'm continuing my walk on that day 6 after the passing the wine fountain. Came across a food truck that was parked along the trail. I stopped for a snack and learned that the couple who owned and operated the food truck had moved from Abbotsford, BC to Spain. And they were both born in Pincher Creek. They had felt prompted by God to move to Spain and purchase a food truck as their mission to the pilgrims. This husband spent his time visiting with the pilgrims who stopped at the food truck. So I'm continuing my journey, walking along the trail, and there were chalk cliffs visible in the distance for quite a way on the trail that day. I've mentioned the evening mass before, but it's quite common, and they have evening mass with pilgrims' blessings in the evening. That evening I attended mass at the Church of St. Mary in Los Arcos. The beauty of the churches in Spain just amazed me. The next day on the trail, I met a gentleman from New Zealand. We chatted, and I learned that he was a warden at an Anglican church in New Zealand. Imagine that. Coincidence or what? We talked about our experiences and the issues at our respective churches. Despite the geographical distance between Cochrane and New Zealand, we were experiencing similar issues. Further along the trail that day, a local man approached me with a bunch of grapes in his hand, and he offered them to me. He motioned and spoke to me in Spanish. Again, I didn't understand what he was telling me, but I believe he was pointing out where his vineyard was located. It was a hot day, and these grapes were very sweet, delicious, and refreshing. Another example of God providing and the kindness of strangers. Later that day, I arrived in the old town center of Vienna. There were crowds of people dressed in white and red converging on the town plaza for the running of the bulls. Apparently, this was the last day of a 5-day festival. Later on, a marching band was playing near the albergue. They processed through the streets of the old town, accompanied by very tall mascots of kings, queens, and other nobility. The sunset that evening was very stunning and was the first of many that I experienced on the journey. The next day I set out for Logroño, passing through more agricultural land. But some wooded areas. On the way into Logroño, I passed a park, and on that park there was rose bushes with the Camino rose. I arrived in Logroño, and in the distance you could see the spires of St. Mary's Cathedral and the Palace of St. Mary. The cathedral is the twin spires on the right. I found the albergue. It wasn't open yet, but people were waiting and soaking their feet in a foot fountain, so I joined them. It was so cool and refreshing. That afternoon, I explored the old town, and then I went to the Santa Maria Cathedral of St. Mary and had toured the inside. Logroño is the capital of the renowned wine-producing region of La Rioja. It is quite a pretty city. The next day, on September the 19th, a trail out of Logroño passed through the Reservoir Pantono. It's a sanctuary for birds and wildlife. That day, I talked to a couple of ladies on the trail. One who is from France had started the Camino in France 3 years ago. That first year, she walked for 10 days. The next year, she walked for another 30 days. And this year, she hoped to complete the Camino in Santiago. So people do the Camino in different ways. Continued on my journey through the more agricultural land and vineyards of La Rioja. And they were at grape harvest time, so you can see the grapes on the trees and just the insert of a bucket of grapes. That day I stopped at a church of Assumption in Navarrete. I stopped there and prayed, and I lit a candle in memory of my neighbor, whose funeral was that day. And I spent my birthday, September 20th, on the trail from Ventosa to Serena, a distance of 28 kilometers, past this stone beehive hut, which is a shelter for shepherds, farmers, and travelers. It was an emotional day for me because it was my birthday, and it was my daughter's birthday 2 days later, and I knew that my family would be gathering to celebrate. But I still enjoyed the scenery. Some of this land reminded me of land close to where I grew up in Maple Creek and where my father's home was in Hatton, Saskatchewan. I walked into Serena that evening with two pilgrims, a daughter and her father from Barcelona. That evening, they invited me to join them for supper at the local bar. The father didn't speak English, but his daughter was very good at carrying on a conversation and translating as necessary. Since it was my birthday, I had cheesecake for dessert, and they also shared a piece of cake. The next morning started with rain, and it was forecast to last most of the day. So as I had read about, I packed everything in plastic bags in my backpack. As I was leaving the albergue, I noticed a rain poncho on a cabinet by the door. Pilgrims often leave things behind to lighten their loads. I asked the host about it, and he motioned for me to take it, and he helped me to put it on over my backpack. Then he gave me a blessing, and also the pilgrim who had been my roommate the night before. And this came as a complete surprise because he had been rather impersonal up to that moment. I set out without a planned final destination that day because I didn't know how long or how hard it would rain. But it only rained until mid-morning. I stopped in Santo Domingo de la Calzada and toured the cathedral. It's not unlike some of the churches and cathedrals I'd already seen. Very beautiful. But there's one distinct difference about this church. At the back of the church, kind of up high, about the height just above the sound booth, there's a chicken coop. And there's a live rooster and a hen in that chicken coop. And the reason they're there is to commemorate the miracle of the hanged pilgrim, one of the many legends of the way of St. James. According to legend, St. James saved a young man from death after he had been wrongly accused and hanged for stealing a silver goblet. Sorry, I went by that one too fast. There is, you can kind of see it, the rooster there, off to the side. So I continued my journey, and as I said, the rain had stopped by noon, and stopped at this cross to take a picture, and another pilgrim came by and offered to take my picture, and we exchanged pictures that day. I stopped for that night at the Albergue San Juan Bautista in Grignon. The albergue is located in the upper floors of an annex to the Church of St. John the Baptist. It had been recommended to me by a couple of other pilgrims along the way. All the pilgrims who stayed there participated in preparing the meal or cleaning up after the meal. This one shows the preparation for the meal on the left and the cleaning up on the right. And then, of course, the meal. There was a lot of energy in that room during the preparation of the meal, during the meal, and during cleanup. After supper, we gathered in a room in the church for a time of reflection. And during this time, some of the young people shared that they were inspired by the older pilgrims and that hope that they can still do the Camino when they are our age. The sleeping accommodations in that albergue consisted of mats on the floor in a large room. It seems a little strange, but staying at that albergue was one of the most enriching and most memorable of the entire pilgrimage. I was very grateful for the recommendations and the circumstances that led me to stop there. Another example of God leading me. Now, all the Caminos provide laundry facilities of some sort. The ones at Grignon were a little bit more unique than most of the rest. It was in an upstairs room, and you had to climb those steps over that concrete to get to the facilities. So most of the time, laundry sinks were provided to hand wash our clothes, and clotheslines to hang them to dry. Washing clothes was one of the first chores to do after arriving at an albergue, so that they would have time to dry. Well, there wasn't too much drying going on in that room, I can tell you. But an important consideration when buying clothes for the journey was to ensure they are quick drying, but I never found any quick drying wool socks. So often clothes were not dry by the end of the day, and so there were clothes hanging everywhere in the dorms. And it was not uncommon on the trail to see clothes hanging from the backpacks of pilgrims. So continuing my journey the next day, I stopped for a rest and to change my socks. From my research, I learned that sock liners should be worn to prevent blisters. These are just a thin pair of socks worn under hiking socks. Applying Vaseline to the feet and changing socks midway through the day would also help to prevent blisters. And even though I did get some blisters, they weren't bad. A couple who had stayed at Grignon the night before walked by while I was at the rest stop. I was sitting beside a sunflower, and one of them thought it was a great image, so took my picture. She told me that they live nearby and are planning to open up an albergue in the fall. The trail continued through more farmland, and even though the clouds looked really threatening that day, it didn't rain. I passed by this church, couldn't resist taking a picture of the wind vane on top of this bell. But some very scenic photos. Passed through some oak and pine woodlands. So I mentioned the evening masses that I attended wherever I could. These were Catholic masses conducted in Spanish, but of course, the liturgy was very familiar. However, in the Church of San Juan de Tego, the priest asked pilgrims to read the lessons in their own language. And he asked me to read the lesson and the psalm in English. They also had the order of service present on handouts in many different languages. The next day I started out and passed, just a second. I was heading from San Juan to Burgos this day and passed through or by a military zone, which is behind the sign on the right, on the left. The trail that day passed over was more rock, exposed rock, which pilgrims often called dragon's teeth. Very uncomfortable walking over that. The top of that hill is the cross of the Mata Grande. And continuing on, some spectacular views and more cropland. This was a sunflower crop. On the way into Burgos, I walked through a river park and a river with some ducks and geese. I arrived in Burgos at about 3 o'clock. The street was deserted, but it was siesta time. I decided to spend a rest day in Burgos. It was about time for me to stop and take a rest, and I wanted to see the cathedral there. I attended Mass the next day in the Cathedral of Santa Maria. And then I went inside. After Mass, I took a tour of the cathedral. It is one of the most beautiful cathedrals in Spain and one of the largest. There are many beautiful decorated small chapels. I have 3 presentations here, so just give me a sec while I queue up the next one. So despite my previous plans to stay at a hotel on rest days, I stayed in the albergue in Burgos overnight. It actually had everything I needed, and by then I was used to staying in them. But it had laundry facilities, so I could do an actual wash. The next day, I walked from Burgos to Cornelius del Camino. I found that a drawback of taking the rest day was now that I was a day behind the group of people who were walking the same pace as I was. But it also provided me an opportunity to meet new pilgrims. On the way to Cornelius, I passed a tiny church in Rabe de la Cazaldas. There were many people coming and going from this church, so I stopped to see why. Inside, there were two elderly nuns. They were giving pilgrims blessings and then giving them a medallion with the Blessed Virgin Mary on them. This seemed very special to me, and I became very emotional after receiving the blessing and the medallion. The medallion was reminiscent of ones I had received as a child. After that church, and all along the Camino, there were numerous murals. But after the church, there were several depicting Bible passages. One thing just to point out on this one, though, is on the sides of on the posts beside the mural are two yellow arrows. And those were very common along the trail to keep us on the trail. This is another mural, and it has the passage of Luke 10:27, said, "Love your God with all your heart, and your neighbor as yourself." And it depicts a pilgrim who had fallen down and another pilgrim stopping to help. And this reminded me of all the love and support that I received before I started the Camino, from family, relatives, people at All Saints, friends, neighbors, and also the love and support that I was continuing to receive while on my pilgrimage from these same people at home and from people on the trail and in the cities, towns, and villages. Even if I stopped to change socks, people would stop and ask, "Do you need anything?" The third mural I passed was this one, and I couldn't resist including it for the prayer show group. The Camino Francés passes through three distinctly different geographical areas. There's foothills and mountainous region of the Pyrenees, the relatively flat plains called the Meseta, and the hill country of Galicia. Between Burgos and Hornillos del Camino, I entered the Meseta. It can be very hot and dry with little shade. And villages can be seen from a long way off, and it seems to take a long time to get to them. Some pilgrims skip the Meseta and catch a bus to the Galician hills to avoid the boredom and the heat. I'd also heard of the Camino described in three stages as physical, emotional, and spiritual. As I journeyed, I began to understand this description. But for me, they weren't entirely distinctly different stages. The first few days in the Pyrenees were definitely physical, as we developed our Camino legs and got into a daily rhythm. Walk, arrive at your destination, personal care and laundry, plan the next day, message family, eat supper, sleep, wake up, repeat. It was a very simple life. But by this point, I was very much in the emotional and spiritual stages. I had never in my life been so sure of God's presence and guidance. The morning of September 27th, the sunrise and morning light provided some beautiful photos. I loved the early mornings on the Camino because of this. This was my second day on the Meseta, and unfortunately, I was very tired and hit a bit of a low point because I'd come down with a cold. That's a hazard of staying in the albergues. The churches along the Camino, as I've mentioned, never ceased to amaze me. I entered a small town of Hontanas. Just notice all the signs on the side of this building. There's the arrow and the yellow shell sign, all familiar signs that you'll see all along the Camino. But I stopped in this small church, in this small village, and again was impressed with the interior of that church. Or there's this one in the Church of St. Mary in Castro Harris, a village with a population of only 500 people. And yet, look at the beauty and the craftsmanship inside that church. It's just mind-boggling. There are also numerous crosses and memorials along the Camino and monuments. This is just a sampling of some of them. This one is an old stone one. And this is a monument further along, a couple monuments. There's also many ruins along the Camino. Like these ruins of the Hermitage of St. Michael, from the outside and from the inside. The Monastery of St. Felix of Oka, and the 14th century Convent of St. Anton. This was the ancient monastery and hospice of the Antonine order founded in France in the 11th century. The order's sacred symbol was a T-shaped cross known as a tau, symbolizing divine protection against evil and sickness. And continued on to Castro Harris, and there, overlooking the town, was the ruins of a castle. The day after that, after visiting the convent of St. Anton, I felt a lot better and more energetic. As I mentioned, the order's sacred symbol was the T-shaped cross, symbolizing divine protection against evil and sickness. And the next day, I was feeling better. I never noticed that until I was preparing this presentation. On September 29th, I set out from Modillo del Camino to Carrion de los Condos and walked by the Canal of Castilla, which provides irrigation for the crops around that area. I took an alternate scenic route that day, and on that scenic routes sometimes aren't quite as well signed, and I missed a turn, but went through a small village and walked by this church. And I was just getting in the habit of checking out the churches to see what they were like in the inside and maybe stopping to pray. This one, again, just struck me, and I felt that missing that turn turned out well and was another indication of God leading me. Missing the turn did not really have any serious consequences. I just ended up back on the main trail sooner than I anticipated. Many of the portions of the Camino use old Roman roads, especially on the Meseta. Between Carrion de los Condos and Terradillos, the original Roman road was built from rock that had to be sourced elsewhere because there was no rock in that area. And it was passed through a floodplain, so it had to be built up so it would not wash out. So you just think about the old Romans building these gravel roads through those distances. It was a long, straight road and seemed to go on forever, like much of the Meseta. It's no wonder some people choose to bypass the Meseta. The next day, I walked past the bodegas of Maratinos, which historically were used for winemaking and food storage. That day, I crossed the geographic center of the Camino in Sahugan, which is a seat of great ecclesiastical power a historical town, and a popular tourist destination. There was a lot to see, so I took the scenic route through town to see many of the historic sites and walked by another church, the Church of St. Terso. The altar in this church is maybe a little more plain than some of the others, but it had these statues. There were several of them, but this is one of Jesus carrying the cross, and his mother, the Blessed Virgin Mary, or the Virgin of Solitude. That evening was another beautiful sunset. The next day, I arrived in Lyon. Many beautiful buildings in Lyon, such as the Museum of Cassel-Boutines, a Gaudi building. I stayed overnight so that I could tour the cathedral the next morning. I attended Mass, followed by a pilgrim message, that evening at the chapel at the Monastery de Carvajal, where I was staying. And it was here that the Benedictine nuns encouraged us to say, Altrae Susea, as a greeting instead of Buen Camino, when we met other pilgrims along the trail. As mentioned, I toured the cathedral the next morning. It too is a magnificent building. It doesn't have all the small chapels as the one in Burgos. You can see just how big it is. It does have a couple of small chapels. On my way out of the city, I passed some more sights to see. This is the Pilgrim Plaza of San Marcos, with the cross, with a pilgrim sitting beside it. And the Museum of San Marcos. That day, after leaving Lyon, I decided to take the scenic route to avoid the traffic on the main route. I enjoyed the peace and quiet of the scenic route, away from the busy traffic in Lyon and on the highway. It's nice to be back on the trail. I crossed a medieval bridge into Hospital de Oborgo on October the 5th. That evening, I went to a local restaurant for supper, and then a gentleman invited me to join him. He saw from my hat that I was from Canada, and he was from Toronto. He then invited a lady who was sitting by herself at another table to join us. She was originally from St. Catharines, Ontario, but now lives in California. Shortly after that, two men came in, and the lady recognized one of them and invited them to join us. So we ate our dinner and visited for a long time. But this is just another example of the hospitality on the Camino. I got to the albergue at 9 o'clock that night, which to that point had been the latest I had been out. The lights in our 4-person room were already out, which is not uncommon. Pilgrims on the Camino go to bed early, because many of them start their journey before sunrise. On October 6th, I passed through the historic town of Astorga. It's an important Roman city, or was an important Roman city at the intersection of several Roman routes. It's another popular tourist destination. Just show a couple of pictures of churches. There's an archaeological dig site with Roman ruins. The Bishop's Palace, which is now the Museum of the Ways in Astorga. And St. Mary's Cathedral, the large building, and the Church of St. Mary, the smaller one, beside it. And this is the interior of the Church of St. Mary. The cathedral wasn't open. I continued my journey and was getting close to the end of the Meseta. Shortly after Astorga, I reached the 2/3 point from St. Jean Pied de Port, at 260 kilometers from Santiago. And that day, I completed the journey through the Meseta and arrived in hill country. That evening, I stayed at an albergue in Murias de Recevito. After a communal dinner made using fresh vegetables from the albergue garden, the host's friend made wax stamps for the pilgrims. We could choose a design from various designs that he had. I chose a design with Altrea Susea. You can see the wax stamp on the right. It's the one that's in color. And after that, we went outside for another beautiful sunset. I passed this cross on October 7th. By this time, I was meeting many people who started their journey in and beyond Lyon. I met a couple ladies from Rocky Mountain House who were with a tour group. Some people, pilgrims, resent these late starters. But we have to remember that everyone does their own Camino based on their own personal circumstances. Some people do have time constraints. Others may not be capable or desire to walk the entire 800-kilometer distance. The trail that day was going through more wooded areas. I stopped to stay overnight in Von Sonderboden, which is only 2 kilometers from the Cruz de Ferro, or the Iron Cross. On the morning of October 8th, I got up early so I could leave by 7:30 and climb to the Cruz de Ferro. Wanted to get there by sunrise. The Cruz de Ferro is a simple iron cross atop a tall pole. Pilgrims leave a stone or other token of love at the base of the pole. It is time to reconnect with your purpose of being on the Camino. I left a special stone that I brought from home on the pile at the base of the cross and spent some time contemplating my own journey and what brought me here, why I was there. And it was another very emotional time for me. The trail downhill from the Cruz de Ferro provided some beautiful views. The leaves on the trees were starting to turn autumn colors. There were some rocky sections along that section of the trail, but I was now in the hill country. And passes through many villages. This is a pretty mountain village. Another medieval bridge. I arrived that night in Ponferrada. And this is another historic town with a medieval city built around a 12th century Templar castle. Some beautiful buildings such as the City Hall. So we're into part 3. I was now passing through another wine-producing region. I walked by this wine press from the 18th to 19th centuries. Walked through more woodland. One thing that impressed me about this area was the modern structures they had built for their freeways. That's the engineer in me. It wasn't unusual to see livestock on the trail or evidence of livestock on the trails. The trail was getting to be a bit more strenuous now that it was in the hill country, especially compared to the Meseta. On October 11th, I entered the region of Galicia, 161 kilometers from Santiago. Galicia is a mountainous region with strong ties to its Celtic heritage and a distinctive culture with foods such as Galician soup, octopus, and Santiago cake, which was one of my favorite desserts on the Camino. As I entered the small village of Osabrero, a piper was playing his Galician bagpipes. The Galician bagpipes are smaller and different than the great Highland bagpipes. They are higher pitched and usually have 1 to 2 drones, while Scottish pipes are louder, lower pitched, and feature 3 drones. That's from Google. The Camino Francés reaches another high point of 1,370 meters beyond Osabrero. A monument to the Peregrino is located atop the Alto San Roque at 1,270 meters. Scenery from the Galician mountains is stunning. The wild flowers were still in bloom, including crocuses. There were many wildflowers along the Camino, and I just collected photos of a few of them along the way. I passed by this old chestnut tree. This is a sweet chestnut tree, which is very common in Galicia. This particular one was estimated to be 800 years old, and it has a diameter of 2.7 meters. The trails in Galicia were often covered with chestnuts that had fallen from the trees. I reached Sarria on October 12th, which is our anniversary. So I phoned Norma to wish her a happy anniversary. Sarria is 117 kilometers from Santiago, and many people start their Camino journey here because the minimum distance required to earn a Compostela, or certificate of completion, is 100 kilometers. So from Sarria to Santiago, the trail was much more crowded. Many people who started from Sarria were Spanish, and some were in large groups. The photo on the left is a school group. There were also families traveling, such as the mother with her little daughter. I found it much harder to relax and enjoy the walk with so many people along the trail. And they were crowding the bars and restaurants where I stopped for lunch along the trail or for supper. But it's just part of the Camino. The ups and downs of the Galician hills was more physically demanding, and my Achilles tendons and some of my leg muscles started to complain. They really didn't like the downhill section in particular. I contemplated stopping for a rest day, but I did not want to fall behind another group of people that I was walking with. I passed the 100-kilometer marker and arrived in Potomaran and was greeted with this. The center of Potomaran is at the top of a hill. and it's accessed using these steps, which were a little intimidating after walking 23 kilometers. But I climbed them, got to the top of the hill where there's a welcome sign for Porto Moran. That evening I went into St. John's Church to pray. I continued my journey on October 14th, similar scenery than the day before. Passed by this church and cemetery. And one thing I had noticed in Galicia is that the cemeteries were a little different than I'd previously seen in Spain. They have above ground crypts. Another thing that was very common in Galicia is these small elevated huts, which are used to store their crops, mostly maize. And this keep them from rats and rain. By October 15th, I had started to catch up with some of the people with whom I had started. Some of them seemed to be genuinely pleased to see me, and maybe a little surprised to see that I had made it this far. But I could feel the excitement and energy build as we got closer to Santiago. And I did get a few quiet moments as I passed through wooded areas. I crossed many Roman bridges along the trail that day. And even though it hadn't rained for a few days, there were some wet spots. But you can just see how going through something like this just calms you down. I crossed the last medieval bridge into Ribadizzo that evening, or later that day, and there were pilgrims out in the water, just enjoying the cool water on their feet. Now, with the days getting shorter, I was starting my journey in the dark and getting some stunning photos of sunrises. On October 17th, which is my day 37, I got up early to start my journey into Santiago. I approached Santiago. This was a hilltop overlooking Santiago. I arrived into the city and made my way to the old town center and the cathedral. As I got close to the cathedral and to the tunnel that leads into the plaza where the cathedral is, I heard bagpipes again. And there was a single piper piping as pilgrims walked through the tunnel. When I arrived in the plaza, it was crowded with people. There were tour groups, tourists, pilgrims. I had wanted to attend the 12 o'clock Mass, but I had got there right around noon, and by then the cathedral was full and Mass was just about ready to start. I was looking for people I knew. I did see one other pilgrim who had stayed at the same albergue with me a couple nights earlier. We congratulated each other, but I couldn't stop to talk to her. I was just so hyper, I had to keep moving. I was also thinking that the next thing I wanted to do, since I couldn't go to Mass, was get my Compostela. So I asked a pilgrim who was carrying one where he got it, and he gave me direction to the pilgrim office. I got there, the lineup was not very long, and the process was very efficient and went smoothly. Up to this point, upon my arrival in Santiago, I really had not been emotional. But when I was standing in front of the attendant who was now checking my credential to ensure that I had the correct number of stamps and had walked the required distance to receive the Compostela, I broke down in tears. She asked if I was okay. There were counselors available if required. I composed myself enough to complete the process. I went outside where I did see some people who I had been traveling with for the past several days. I recognized a couple who were sitting at a table, and they offered to take my picture. So I got my picture with my Compostela. They offer a second certificate with the distance on it, and the distance on that one was 779 kilometers, which is the official distance of the main trail from Saint Jean Pied de Port to Santiago de Compostela. But I had taken some alternative, more scenic routes and quieter trails. The actual distance, according to my tracking app, was 799.5 kilometers. That was an average of 21.6 kilometers per day over the 7 days. After that, I went into the chapel to pray and to calm down. After I gathered my composure, I stopped for lunch on a patio at a nearby restaurant. I was hoping to see more pilgrims that I recognized, but unfortunately didn't see any. After lunch, I returned to the plaza and to the cathedral and walked around to the other three plazas surrounding the cathedral. I met one other pilgrim who was one of the ladies who shared a taxi with me on my way from Zubiri to Zabeldica on my second day. She had just arrived. By then, I thought it was time to head to my albergue for the night. I had hoped to return later that evening for the evening mass. But I got to the albergue and settled in, and I just felt too tired that evening to return. So after reaching Santiago, many pilgrims continued to Finisterre or Land's End on the west coast of Spain. It's a distance of 98 kilometers. I had considered this in my planning, but I really did not have enough time to complete the journey before my flight home. And physically and mentally, I was drained. I decided it would be more beneficial for me to take a few days at a retreat so I could decompress and take stock of my journey. I spent my next few days at the small private retreat house. I reviewed my journal and photos and talked to the other pilgrims there and prepared myself to return to normal life at home. I did return to Santiago on October 12th, and October 22nd, I returned to the cathedral. That day, it was raining. Took a couple pictures of the plaza that I hadn't got pictures of the prior time I was there. Then I went into the cathedral, and I was still early for the 9 o'clock Mass, and there were not very many people in it, so I was able to tour the cathedral on my own. Saw the crypt of St. James. This is a view of the cathedral from the back. It seats 1,000 people. And this is a view of the pipe organ. And the Botafermo, which is the big thing hanging from the ceiling. It's the incense burner, which is hanging over the altar. And it takes 10 men to raise and lower that thing. It is used now only on special feast days or by special request. I did attend the 9 a.m. Mass. And during that Mass is when I finally felt closure of my Camino journey and felt ready to return home. So in conclusion, the Camino journey was an incredible experience for me. First and foremost, I am convinced that God called me to do the Camino, and He guided me on my journey. I have never been more aware of his presence in my life. I would never have been able to complete the journey without the tremendous support of other people. Norma supported me from the first time I mentioned the Camino and throughout the journey. My family also supported me by their reactions to my messages on WhatsApp. It's amazing how much a little emoji can mean to you. I dearly miss Norma and my family on the journey, and my love and appreciation for them grew while I was on my journey. Relatives, friends, neighbors, and people at All Saints supported me with their comments, well wishes, cards, gifts, blessings, and prayers before I left, and their continued prayers while I was in Spain. And I'm extremely grateful for all the love and support that I received, and I really believe I needed that to complete it. The small acts of kindness that I received on the Camino were surprising and were supportive and support and encouragement. I enjoyed the fellowship at the Camino meals and the concern and hospitality of other pilgrims. Prayer times at the churches along the way helped me to slow down and to remember my purpose for the pilgrimage. The Camino brings people together because we all have our shared journey in common. I met many people who inspired and encouraged me. Despite the simple routine of the Camino, the journey is like life. It does have its highs and lows. Adjusting to the language and culture of Spain was a bit of a challenge, especially the later meal times. I enjoyed the tortillas de patatas, rice paella, Santiago cake, and of course the wine. The early morning walks were enjoyable, relaxing, and were cooler. I witnessed beautiful sunrises and morning lighting that enhanced the natural beauty of the landscape. I enjoyed walking through the wooded areas, hearing the birds, seeing the flowers in bloom, and seeing the views from the hilltops and the mountaintops. I was blessed by good weather throughout my journey. I am very grateful to God that He called me on the journey and He blessed me along the way. Thank you for listening. So I think most of you have seen the display table. It's on the back that has my certificates and a few other things, books and whatever, paraphernalia. And I'll be around if anybody has any questions.